The contractor was only trying to run a new heating duct. The blueprints showed a chimney chase behind the upstairs hall wall, nothing else, so when his sledge went through the plaster and hit brick, then went through the brick and hit air, he stopped and called for a light. Behind the wall was a room, a small one. It was on no blueprint of the house, and the brick that had closed its doorway had been laid from the inside. There was a writing desk against the boarded-up window. A single chair turned to face the boards, as if to face the harbor beyond them. And on the desk, under 50 years of dust, a stack of letters tied with a ribbon gone the color of weak tea. Every envelope had been stamped and mailed. Everyone had come back, and the name written on every one of them belonged to a man the family had buried, with the whole town watching, in the autumn of 1944. The couple who bought the Ashford house bought it the way people buy old houses, half in love, half in over their heads. It had stood empty a long time, the last of the family gone, the estate finally settled, and the place sold to strangers. They had planned to gut the upstairs. They had not planned to find a sealed room behind the hall wall, and once they had found it, they did not know who to call. So they called the Historical Society. That is how it came to Ruth Calloway. Ruth had been the volunteer archivist at the town's Historical Society for 19 years. She was the person you called when you found something old and did not know what it was, and she knew the Ashford name the way everyone in that town knew it before she ever opened a single one of those letters. You could not grow up there and not know it. The Ashford clock and instrument works had built half the town. The Ashford name was on the library on the old bank and on the war memorial in the green, where it was carved under a single date, 1944. Because the Ashfords were a Gold Star family. Their only son, Lawrence, had gone to the war and not come home. The town had grieved him for 60 years. There was a plaque and a scholarship and a story everyone knew, the bright Ashford boy, lost overseas, the family that gave its heir to the country. It was the kind of grief a small town folds into itself and keeps. Ruth had stood at that memorial on every Memorial Day she could remember. She had read Lawrence Ashford's name off the granite 100 times. So when the new owners led her up the stairs and showed her the hole in the wall, and the room behind it, and the desk, and the chair turned to the boarded window, and the ribbon-tied stack of letters with that same name on every envelope, Lawrence Ashford, she felt the floor of a story she had known her whole life shift very slightly under her feet. She did not know yet that it was going to come all the way apart. To understand what Ruth was holding, you have to understand what the Ashfords were. The works came first. In the 1880s, a man named Ashford started making brass mantel clocks and ship's instruments in a harbor town that mostly fished. And within a generation, the Ashford clock and instrument works was the largest thing in the county. By the time the story that matters begins, the family lived in a stone house on the point above the harbor, and the head of the family was Hadley Ashford, a hard, careful, respectable man who ran the works and sat on every board the town had. Hadley and his wife Eleanor had one child who lived, a son, Lawrence, born in 1921. The heir, the boy who would have the works and the name and the house on the point. And then there was the war. Lawrence went the way the sons of those families went, and in the autumn of 1944 the telegram came to the house on the point, and not long after, the town learned that the Ashford boy was gone. There was a service, though there was no body to bury, there rarely was. Hadley accepted the town's condolences with the stiff dignity people admired in him. A name was carved on the memorial. The family became, permanently, the family that had given its only son. Eleanor did not take it the way her husband did. People remembered that, in the vague way, a town remembers things 60 years later. She stopped coming to the works Christmas party. She stopped coming to most things. She kept to the house on the point. And over the years, she became one of those widowed by grief figures a town files under sad and stops asking about. When she died, decades later, the obituary called her devoted to her late son's memory. Everyone nodded. Of course she was. That was the story. It was a good story and a true feeling one, and Ruth had believed every word of it her whole life. Two things in that sealed room did not fit it. Ruth wrote them both in her notebook before she touched anything, the way she always did. The first was the room itself, sealed, hidden, on no plan of the house. The second was the letters, dozens of them in one careful hand, every one mailed and every one returned, all to a young man who had supposedly been dead before the first of them was ever written. Ruth took the letters back to the Historical Society and laid them out on the long table by the window in the order of their postmarks, and that was the first thing that stopped her. They spanned years. The earliest was postmarked 1945. The latest was postmarked 1961. 16 years of letters, 2 or 3 a year, all in the same hand. A woman's hand, careful, schooled, the hand of someone taught penmanship as a girl. Ruth would confirm later what she already suspected at the table. It was Aliner's hand. The mother's. Every letter was addressed to Lawrence. Not to a grave, not to a memory, to a person, at a street address, in a town out west that meant nothing to Ruth. And every single one had come back. The envelopes were stamped and re-stamped by a post office far away, returned to sender. No such person at this address. Addressee unknown. Aliner had mailed them. They had failed. She had gotten them back, and instead of throwing them away, she had carried them up to a hidden room and tied them in a ribbon and kept them, for the rest of her life, in the dark. Sit with what that means, because Ruth did. A woman whose son the whole town believed was killed in 1944 sat down, year after year, for 16 years, and wrote him letters. Long ones. Ruth could feel the thickness of the pages through the envelopes she had not yet opened. She addressed them to a real street in a real town. She mailed them. They came back saying no such person lived there. And the next year she wrote again. You do not write 16 years of letters to a dead boy. You write to a living one you cannot reach. Grief writes a letter and never mails it. This was something else. This was a woman who believed, who knew there was an address where her son might be, and who kept trying it and kept being told he was not there and kept trying anyway. Ruth looked at the careful, hopeful, returned to sender hand of a woman 60 years dead, and she stopped thinking of this as a sad story about a mother who could not let go. She started thinking it was a story about a son who was not dead. The letters were not the only thing in the room. There was the desk, and in the desk's single shallow drawer there was a document, folded once, that was not a letter. It was a will. Ruth knew enough to know what she was looking at. It was a will properly drawn, witnessed, and signed, and it was Aliner's. Not Hadley's. A married woman in that era could write a will for what was legally her own. Her personal money, what she had brought to the marriage, what was hers to give. Aliner had done exactly that. The will was dated 1961. That date is the thing. 1961. 17 years after the autumn, the town buried Lawrence Ashford. And the will left the bulk of Aliner's own estate, her money, a parcel of shore land that had come down through her family, the contents of this very room, to her son. To Lawrence Ashford. Named 17 years after he died. Ruth set it down and made herself slow down, because there are ordinary explanations for a strange document, and a careful person rules them out before she reaches for a strange one. A grieving mother might name a dead child in a will out of pure sentiment, leaving a bequest in memory of. Ruth read the clause again. It was not sentimental. It was not in memory of. It was operative. It left real property to a named living beneficiary, and it gave an instruction for how he was to be found, through a third party. A name and a box number in that same far-off western town the returned letters were addressed to. You do not write an operative bequest to a dead man. A lawyer would not draft it, and 2 witnesses would not sign it. A will that leaves shore land and money to Lawrence Ashford and tells the executor where to look for him is a will written by someone who believed Lawrence Ashford was alive to receive it. 2 documents now, from the same sealed room, said the same impossible thing. The letters said a mother spent 16 years writing to a son the town had buried. The will said she spent her own estate trying to leave that son something, through a stranger in a western town, 17 years after his death. Which left Ruth with the question the whole room was built around. If Lawrence Ashford died in 1944, and the town had a memorial that said he had, then who exactly had decided that, and on what? Ruth started where the town's certainty came from, the death. The memorial said 1944. The story said killed overseas. But a memorial is carved from what a family tells the stonecutter, and Ruth wanted the record underneath it. So she pulled what a town archivist can pull: the casualty listings, the local paper's wartime files, and through the state, the vital record that the estate would have run on. The casualty record told her something the memorial did not. The War Department in the autumn of 1944 had not reported Lawrence Ashford killed. It had reported him missing. Missing in action, the status they gave a man when his unit could not produce him and could not produce a body. A status that was its own particular cruelty because it was not an answer. Missing was not dead. Missing was a door left open. The family had closed it. Because the second document Ruth found was a death certificate, a state of Connecticut death certificate for Lawrence Ashford, filed in 1945, the year after the telegram. Not a military finding. A civilian certificate, registered locally, signed by a town physician, attesting to the death of a man whose body was 3,000 miles away if it existed at all, and whom that physician had certainly never examined. It had been filed by the family. By Hadley. Ruth knew in plain terms what a paper like that was for. You cannot settle a large estate around a man who is merely missing. The law makes you wait, sometimes for years, before a missing person can be presumed dead, and an heir who is only missing is an heir who might still come home and claim what is his. A death certificate, registered and signed, cut through all of it. It let the estate be settled. It closed the question of the missing heir for good. It turned an open door into a closed one, on paper, with a signature, years before the law would have allowed it on its own. Someone had taken Lawrence Ashford's missing and made it dead in 1945 with a local doctor's pen, for reasons a settled estate and a buried marriage explain completely. And the moment Ruth understood that the death itself had been manufactured, every other strange thing in that room turned its face toward her. The letters, the will. A mother who kept writing to an address out westimated, she had stopped wondering whether Lawrence Ashford was alive. She had started trying to find out where he went. The answer to where Lawrence went began, as these things do, with where he had been. Ruth went looking for the year before the war took him, and she found it in the most ordinary record there is. A marriage license. In the spring of 1943, before he shipped out, Lawrence Ashford had married a young woman from the harbor end of town, the daughter of a family that worked the fish cannery, Portuguese immigrant people, hardworking and poor, and exactly the sort of family the Ashfords of the house on the point did not marry into. There was no society notice. There was no wedding at the stone church the Ashfords sat at the front of. It had been done quietly at the town hall, weeks before he left. Hadley Ashford, Ruth was now certain, had known. A man like that always knew. And here the shape of it came clear, and it was uglier than a lost at war story and a great deal more human. His son had married beneath the name, in secret, and then gone to war. Then the telegram came, missing. Not dead, missing. And somewhere in the gap that missing left open, Hadley Ashford made a decision. He did not wait for his son to come home to a marriage he would not allow. He filed a death certificate. He buried Lawrence as a hero, kept the estate and the works in his own hands, settled the boy into the family story as a tragedy instead of a scandal. And when Lawrence, it seems, did not die, when he came back from the war alive to find himself legally dead and his marriage treated as something that had never happened, the door home was already bricked over. Because a man declared dead by his own father, cut off from the name and the works and the house, married to a woman that family would never receive, that man does not fight his way back into a place that has buried him. He takes the new life the lie has handed him. He goes westimated, he takes another name. And his mother, who is not allowed to say any of this out loud in her own house, finds the one address she can and starts to write. Ruth thought about Alina in that house on the point, married to the man who had done this, knowing her son was alive and 3,000 miles away under a name she could only guess at, and writing to him anyway, year after year, and getting the letters back. And she wondered what a woman like that does with proof. Ruth got permission to open the letters. Most were exactly what the postmarks promised. Alina's hand, mailed out, returned unopened, the pages still sealed inside after 60 years. A mother writing into a silence that kept handing the words back to her. But not all of them had come back. Near the bottom of the ribbon-tied stack, in a different hand, a man's hand, blunter, written in pencil, there were 3 letters that had not been returned. They had been received. They were addressed to a leaner at the house on the point, and they had come from that same town out west, and they were signed with a name that was not Lawrence Ashford. The name was Lewis Hale, but they were not the letters of a stranger named Lewis Hale. They asked about the harbor. They asked whether the old dog was still alive. One of them said, in a line Ruth read 3 times, that he was not angry at her, that he had never once been angry at her, and that she should stop saying she was sorry in every letter because none of it had ever been hers to be sorry for. Lewis Hale was Lawrence Ashford. The son who died in 1944 had been alive in the 1950s, writing back to his mother under a borrowed name, asking about a dog. Somewhere out west, a man had lived a whole second life, and a few times, against the odds, his mother's letters had found him, and he had answered, and she had hidden his answers in the only place in that house her husband would never look. Which was the thing Ruth kept circling back to. The room. Whoever had kept these letters had not just hidden them in a drawer. They had put them in a room and bricked the room shut. That is not how you hide something from history. That is how you hide something from a person who lives in the house with you, someone who must never, ever find it. Hadley had declared his son dead. If Hadley had found these letters, these replies, this will proof that the dead son was alive and being written to and being left land, he would have destroyed every page of it and the death he had manufactured with it. Someone in that house had made very sure he never could. So Ruth went back to the room itself and looked at it not as a discovery, but as a thing somebody had built. The brick that had closed the doorway had been laid from the inside, the rough, unfinished faces turned out toward the hall, the neat faces turned in, the work of someone sealing themselves on the room's side of the wall and then leaving by some other way, or sealing it as the last thing they did to it. The mortar work was amateur. Uneven courses, too much mortar in some joints and not enough in others, the careful but untrained work of a person who had never laid brick before and was doing it alone, by hand, probably at night, in a house where they could not be caught doing it. It was not a contractor's wall. No mason built this. Someone in that family had closed this room with their own hands, badly, in secret. And Ruth thought about the 2 people who had lived in that house. Hadley, who had the money and the standing, and the works full of men who could brick up a doorway in an hour and say nothing. If Hadley had wanted this room sealed, it would have been sealed clean by someone he paid. And Hadley had no reason to seal it. The room held the one thing that could undo everything he had built, the proof his dead son was alive. A man like Hadley does not hide that evidence behind a wall. He burns it. The other person who lived in that house was a leaner, who had no workmen of her own to call, who could not have a single soul know what was in this room, who would have had to do it herself, alone, badly, in the dark, exactly the way it had been done. The will in the desk was in a leaner's hand. The letters were in a leaner's hand. And the wall, Ruth was now nearly certain, had been laid by a leaner's hands too. Which turned the last question of the whole case from how into why. Not why a father would hide a shameful secret behind a wall. Why a mother would take the proof that her son was alive, the letters, the replies, the will that tried to leave him something, and instead of carrying it to a lawyer, instead of using it, brick it into a room and leave it in the dark. The answer was in the will, and in the date she signed it, and in what she knew about the man she was married to. Ruth laid it all out for the new owner of the house, on the long table by the window, in order, because the documents told it better than she could. The marriage license, 1943. Lawrence married a cannery family's daughter in secret, against everything his father's name stood for. The casualty record, 1944. Missing in action, not dead, missing. The death certificate, 1945. A civilian paper, signed by a town doctor over no body, filed by Hadley, that turned missing into dead and let him settle the estate and close his missing son's claim to it. The letters, 1945 to 1961. Elena writing to her living son under the name he had taken, year after year, the words handed back to her. The 3 replies in pencil from a man called Lewis Hale who asked about a dog. The will, 1961, Eleanor leaving her own estate to Lawrence Ashford, named, alive, 17 years dead on the town's memorial. The new owner was quiet for a while. Then she asked the only question that was really left, the same one Ruth had been holding. Not about the money or the house or what any of it was worth now. Why did she hide it, she said. If she could prove he was alive, if she had his own letters back, why brick it up? Why not show someone? And Ruth said she thought the answer was the hardest part of the whole thing, and that to understand it, you had to understand what Eleanor was choosing between. Because Eleanor could have used what was in that room. She could have taken the letters and the replies to a lawyer and proven her husband had filed a false death and seized a living son's inheritance. She could have brought Lawrence home, legally undead, to the works and the name. She could have blown the whole quiet lie apart. And she did not. She wrote a will instead, in secret, and then she sealed the proof of it into a wall. Ruth had thought at first that this was a woman too beaten down to fight. Reading the room in order, she no longer thought that. She thought it was the opposite. She thought Eleanor had looked very clearly at exactly what she had, and chosen, deliberately, the one thing that would protect her son instead of avenging him. Here is what Eleanor knew that Ruth had to reconstruct. Her son was alive, 3,000 miles away, living under a name nobody back east knew, married to a woman his father had erased along with him. He had, by his own letters, made a kind of peace with it. He asked about the dog. He told his mother to stop apologizing. He was not coming home, and somewhere in those 16 years, she had understood that he did not want to, that the life he had built as Lewis Hale, poor and quiet and his own, was better than the one waiting for him as the resurrected Ashford heir, with a dead man's paperwork to unwind and a father to face, and a town to explain himself to. And the proof in that room could not bring him the good of that without the harm. If Eleanor used it, if she proved Lawrence was alive, she did not just expose Hadley. She dragged her son back into the light. She made him overnight the man whose father had declared him dead, the scandal the whole town would turn over for years, the heir who had married a cannery girl and vanished. She would have undone the false death and the theft of her son's inheritance, yes, but she would have done it by detonating the quiet, separate life her son had chosen, 3,000 miles from all of it. So she made a different choice. She kept the proof because she could not bear to destroy the only evidence her son had ever been hers, but she kept it where it could never be used, by Hadley or by anyone. She wrote a will that tried to send him a piece of what was rightfully his, quietly, through a stranger, asking nothing of him in return. And then she took the letters and the replies and the will, and she closed them into a small room with her own hands, and turned the one chair to face the window over the harbor he had sailed out of, and walled it shut. She did not hide the room from history. History could find it, it finally did. She hid it from her husband, and from the one outcome she would not allow, her living son paying all over again for being alive. For 60 years the town had a picture of that family, and the picture was exactly upside down. The honored one was Hadley, the grieving Gold Star father, stiff and dignified at the memorial, the man who had given his only son to the war. He was the one the town respected, and he was the one who had taken a telegram that said missing, a door still open, a son who might walk back through it, and closed it himself with a bought certificate and a doctor's pen, so he could settle the money and bury the marriage and never have a cannery girl's husband for an heir. The grief everyone honored him for was a grief he had manufactured. He mourned in public a son he had thrown away in private, and who was, the whole time, alive. The pitied one was Eleanor, the mother broken by grief, who stopped coming to things, who kept to the house and faded into a sad story the town told gently. And she was the only person in the whole thing who never lied. She knew her son was alive. She wrote to him for 16 years. She got him back in pencil 3 times. She wrote him into her will. And when she understood that the proof in her hands could only hurt him, she made the hardest choice a mother in that house could make. She protected him instead of herself, gave up the vindication that would have cleared her and damned her husband, and sealed the evidence into a wall so that no one, not Hadley, not the town, not time, could ever use her living son against him. The bricked-up room was not a tomb for a shameful secret. It was the opposite of that. It was the safest place a powerless woman could build with her own untrained hands to keep the one thing she had left of a child she was not allowed to claim. She did not wall him away. She walled him in, kept, where her husband could not reach him and the town could not turn him into a story. The chair turned to the window was hers. She had sat there, facing the harbor he sailed from, and written to a dead man who wrote back. And then she had closed the door on all of it and laid the brick herself, course by uneven course, in the dark, so that the truth would survive her without ever being used to wound the only person it was about. None of it can be undone now, which is its own kind of ending. Everyone the documents accuse and everyone they clear has been dead for decades. There is no estate left to reopen, no probate court that will revisit a 1945 settlement, no one to prosecute and no one to compensate. The works closed long ago. The house belongs to strangers who only wanted to run a heating duct. What is left is the memorial. Lawrence Ashford's name is still carved on the granite in the town green under the year 1944, with the other men the town lost. And the strange, quiet fact Ruth has had to sit with is that the name is wrong in every way except the one that matters. He was not killed in 1944. He did not die overseas. He lived a long life out west under another name, and as far as any record shows, was never buried anywhere near that stone. But he was lost to that family in 1944. His father saw to that. So the granite is, in its way, telling a truth it does not understand, that the town lost the Ashford boy in the war. It just has the cause wrong. It says the enemy took him. It was his father. There is one letter Ruth keeps coming back to. The last one in the stack, postmarked 1961, the same year Alina wrote the will, and not long before Alina herself died. It is the only one of the mailed letters that does not have a return stamp on it. All the others came back, no such person, addressee unknown. This last one did not come back. It is in the room because it was never returned, which means one of two things, and Ruth cannot tell you which. It means the letter finally reached him. That after 16 years of writing into a silence that handed the words back, one of Alina's letters, the last one, found Lawrence at last, and he kept it, or it simply stayed where it landed and never bounced home. A mother's letter arriving once at the end. Or it means there was no longer anyone at that address to return it. That by 1961, Lewis Hale, the man who had been Lawrence Ashford, was himself gone, and the letter simply fell into the same silence he had. Alina sealed the room not long after. She never wrote another. Ruth thinks she knew which of the two it was. The room does not say. It only kept the letter unreturned on the top of the stack, where a mother would leave the last word she ever got to send. A family will carve a name in granite to keep a story clean. The Ashfords kept theirs for 60 years and never knew that the one of them they pitied had quietly outloved every lie the rest of them told, and walled the proof of it into the house so it could outlast her without ever costing her son a thing. Somewhere out west, under a borrowed name, a man may have descendants who have never heard the name Ashford. And in a town that still reads his name off a war memorial every spring, no one has yet decided what, if anything, to tell them.